The afternoon sky above Briggs Manor seemed trapped in perpetual dusk, cloaked by a mass of low-hanging clouds that stifled the sun's warmth. Situated at the crest of a windswept hill, the estate dominated the landscape. Its once majestic architecture, a harmonious blend of columned porticos, arched windows, and sprawling terraces, now appeared eerily imposing. The grounds, which had teemed with activity in brighter years, were subdued by a silence that felt almost tangible, as though the very air refused to disturb the heavy aura of despair. Within the cavernous entry hall, the echoes of distant footsteps reverberated across marble floors and up grand staircases. The interior decor still reflected the wealth that had long defined the Briggs family. Gilded mirrors hung from walls adorned with intricate paneling. Vast oil paintings depicted solemn ancestors presiding over an era of refinement. Yet an unshakable sense of neglect wove itself into these once-cherished details. Flickering chandeliers revealed corners layered with dust, and stale air hinted at secrets carefully sealed away. In the midst of this fading opulence, Janice Briggs struggled to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Heavily pregnant and nearing her due date, she moved with careful deliberation through the halls, one hand always braced over her swollen belly. Although her posture suggested a gentle motherly grace, her features betrayed exhaustion and anxiety. Deep shadows underscored her once bright eyes, and the line of her mouth curved into a perpetual grimace that betrayed the deep tension underlying her every movement. For years, Janice had believed Briggs Manor to be a place of safety, a testament to her husband's devoted care and the traditions of his esteemed family. She had been dazzled by the manor's grandeur when she first arrived as a new bride. The luminous ballrooms, the polished banisters, the sweeping gardens beyond each corridor. She had pictured future celebrations and the pitter-patter of children's feet scampering through these corridors. But reality had unraveled in harrowing ways. She found her way to a secluded parlor at the manor's eastern wing, a room half forgotten by the household staff. A small window faced a neglected fountain outside, where water once cascaded, but now stood still in a sludge of autumn leaves. There, Janice sank into a time-worn armchair, the upholstery threadbare from years of sun exposure. She curled her trembling fingers around the armrests, as though steadying herself for what might come next. The entire house seemed to sigh with her. It had not always been like this. In the first year of her marriage to Alan Briggs, she had known laughter and gentle companionship. Alan, heir to the Briggs fortune, had been a figure of both charm and ambition. Never one to shy from responsibility, always the first to ensure Janice's comfort. His visits to the orchard, his softly spoken reassurances, the nights by the grand piano, these memories lingered in her mind like fragments of a distant dream. Then, the name Julia began circulating in hushed tones around the manor. Whispers among the maids suggested a fragile woman whose every breath weighed on Alan's heart. He would slip away for hours or even days at a time, leaving Janice alone in a mansion that felt increasingly colder. Though she tried to dismiss the rumors that Julia was more than a mere acquaintance, the evidence steadily piled up. Unexplained letters, the hush of staff whenever Janice entered a room, the lingering smell of unfamiliar perfume on Alan's jackets. As months passed, Janice realized Alan had made a silent yet unwavering vow to devote his resources, his very life if needed, to saving Julia from her unknown malady. This devotion tightened into something ominous. Attentiveness to Janice's health evaporated, replaced by an eerie aloofness. Where once Alan had been solicitous of her every twinge, now he barely acknowledged her pregnancy. Worse, rumors reached her ears of a possible remedy that her unborn child might provide. The nature of this rumored cure remained mired in contradiction and half-truths. Some said it involved experimental medicine. Others implied a more sinister approach. Janice reeled from the possibility that the child she carried could be deemed no more than a tool to preserve Julia's life. The tension escalated further when she confided in the household's longtime maid, Clara. Gentle and sympathetic, Clara exhibited the caution of someone deeply afraid for her mistress, but even more terrified of crossing Alan. She admitted there might be a plan in place, though she knew few details. Yet the mere rumor fanned Janice's alarm. Suddenly, every fleeting glance or closed-door conversation felt loaded with cryptic significance. Alan's brief, stilted interactions became rife with double meanings. On the evening everything changed. A storm brewed on the horizon. Slivers of lightning sliced the distant sky, and the wind howled through doorways not wholly shut. That was the night Janice confronted Alan, demanding answers about Julia's hold over him and the swirling stories about their unborn child's significance. She remembered how his eyes hardened, how his tone took on a clipped finality that chilled her more than any thunderclap could. "Alan Briggs," icy response recalled in Janice's memory.
"Do not meddle in matters you can't comprehend. You will see soon enough where your loyalties must lie."
Now, seated in the parlor, Janice's breath shuddered. Her unborn child kicked within her, as if echoing her fear. The quiet knock at the door jarred her. Clara stepped inside, carrying a tray bearing a simple meal, a half-hearted arrangement of bread, cheese, and lukewarm tea. The maid's demeanor radiated concern. Clara set the tray down and wrung her hands. She whispered something about ensuring her mistress maintained her strength. Janice wanted to ask if any news had emerged, whether Alan still planned to administer some unknown medicine, whether a doctor had been summoned for her sudden cramps. But a single glimpse of Clara's nervous expression told her such questions were best left unspoken. Fear coated every word that hung in the charged stillness. After Clara departed, Janice forced herself to take a few bites, but nausea churned in her stomach. She placed a protective hand over her belly. Despite everything, she cherished the life stirring within her. This child was innocent of the twisted dynamics overshadowing Briggs Manor. If Alan's intentions were as heartless as she suspected, she could never allow him or anyone else to harm the baby. A burst of thunder shook the window panes, rattling loose an old piece of plaster from the ceiling's molding. The pounding rain and moaning wind outside mirrored her inner turmoil. She sensed that the manor itself might shatter under the strain of secrets it had been compelled to harbor. Gathering what courage she could muster, she rose from the armchair and made her way toward the library. In the library, an imposing chamber with shelves stretching floor to ceiling, Janice had once passed hours reading novels, researching horticulture for the manor's gardens, or simply relaxing in a big leather armchair while Alan played piano in an adjacent music room. Tonight, the library felt deserted, almost funereal, its worn Persian rugs and carefully curated volumes bathed in the flicker of an oil lamp. She glimpsed a reflection of her own drawn face in the glass doors of a bookcase, startled by how gaunt and haunted she looked. She placed a trembling hand on the mahogany desk, breathing in the faint scents of old parchment and leather bindings. She remembered how, a few months ago, she stumbled upon a sealed letter in the drawer of this very desk. A letter addressed to Alan but penned in an unfamiliar, elegant script. Its contents had referred vaguely to Julia's dire condition and the unfortunate necessity, but with no elaboration. That discovery had fed her nightmares. Outside, the storm raged on. With a crack of lightning, the library lights flickered. The large windows offered a partial view of the courtyard, though the downpour rendered everything a blur of watery reflections and wind-whipped trees. Still, Janice found a certain solace in storms. They concealed one's tears, and their raw chaos sometimes matched the swirl of fear and anger churning in her mind. Time drifted strangely in that hush, minutes stretching to near hours. At last, footsteps signaled someone's approach. Alan Briggs strode in, posture erect, coat damp around the shoulders. He paused by the threshold, gaze sweeping the room until it settled on Janice with an expression akin to frustration or exasperation. She braced herself for a confrontation. He moved closer, each footstep methodical, echoing in the cavernous silence. She could smell the rain on him, sense the tension in the set of his shoulders. He spoke in a tone measured yet underlaid by menace.
"You've been prying again, Janice, asking the servants questions. I warned you to let things be."
She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand, silencing her. The haunting gleam in his eyes signaled a total lack of empathy for her predicament. She recalled how, in earlier days, that same hand would cup her cheek gently whenever she felt ill or anxious. Tonight, that gentle gesture was replaced by an aura of intimidation.
Julia's condition is severe. Sacrifices must be made. The child in your womb, let us just say, it may serve a greater purpose. Don't stand in its way.
A chill seized her. So the rumors were partly true. He saw their baby not as a precious new life, but as an ingredient in a twisted attempt to save Julia. Disbelief and anguish surged within her, but fear of him kept her from lashing out. She managed a quiet retort.
"This child is ours, Alan. I won't stand idle while you treat it like an expendable commodity."
Her words were shaky, tears threatening, but they were all she could summon. He gazed at her, something akin to anger flitting across his face. Then, with a dismissive shrug, he departed as abruptly as he arrived, leaving Janice quaking with both dread and a spark of defiance. A hush reasserted itself in the library, broken only by the rain drumming against the windows. Exhausted and fearful, she lingered a few moments more, gathering the courage to carry on. She realized that the hour was late, time to attempt rest, or to steel herself for whatever new torment the household might inflict. With the library's oil lamp in hand, she traversed corridors lined with portraits of austere men and women, each a patriarch or matriarch of the Briggs clan. She felt as though their painted eyes followed her with silent reproach, as if condemning her for letting the family's carefully maintained veneer crumble. Eventually, she reached the bedroom that she and Alan had once shared. The air within it felt stale, the bed's large canopy casting dark shapes across the walls. A single candle flickered on the nightstand, offering a feeble glow. She undressed with slow deliberation, wincing from the weight of her swollen belly, then donned a plain nightgown that felt suddenly too thin against her chilled skin. Slipping under the covers, she tried to recall a time when this bed had been a haven of warmth, where Alan would read to her or share hushed laughter about household gossip. Now, the bed felt alien, a place that no longer belonged to moments of closeness. She curled onto her side, arms protectively around her midsection. Her thoughts drifted to the unborn life stirring gently within, and tears burned at the corners of her eyes. Summoning her last scraps of resilience, she whispered to the child, Janice Briggs, whispering,
"I promise I'll protect you. I won't let them harm you."
The storm outside continued its relentless assault, and in her half-sleep, Janice imagined the thunder as a distant war cry heralding an oncoming battle, and she knew, with or without an ally, the fight for her baby's life would soon become unavoidable. Dawn broke under a dull, leaden sky, the storm having raged through the night and left behind a sullen hush. Raindrops clung to every surface, tree branches, iron gates, windowsills, like tears reluctant to dry. Inside Briggs Manor, the hush felt almost unearthly, as though every living soul feared to break the silence and summon new strife. Janice awoke in her bedroom, her body aching from restless sleep. A deep tension gripped her shoulders and spine, yet more painful was the knowledge that she had no time to languish. Each day tightened the noose around her unborn child, for Alan appeared determined to carry out his plans sooner rather than later. She dressed in a simple gown that no longer fit properly around her abdomen. Then, carefully, she braided her hair, if only to maintain a semblance of composure amid chaos. Gathering her nerve, she pushed open the bedroom door and emerged onto the landing of the manor's grand staircase. Staring down into the cavernous foyer, she noticed the staff gliding across the polished floors, dusting or arranging flowers in tall vases. Yet something about their hurried, hushed behavior set her heart on edge. Nobody lingered. Nobody dared meet her eyes. It was as if each moment brought them closer to a dreaded event. She navigated the winding corridors until she reached the nursery. In brighter times, she had insisted on preparing this room, outfitted with pastel linens, an old rocking chair she found in the attic, and a soft rug embroidered with whimsical animals. The room, though incomplete, had once hinted at hope. She had imagined the baby's laughter resonating in its walls. Now, half of the items lay strewn about, as though someone had rummaged through them in a hurry. She realized, with a new wave of horror, that the household might have made these rummagings at Alan's command, searching for something, or simply discarding items they deemed unnecessary. Her hands trembled as she ran them over the edge of the cradle. She recalled the day she had found the cradle, battered but salvageable, and how she had stayed up late painting it a cheerful pastel color. Tears stung her eyes as she wondered if her baby would ever see it. The silence of the nursery pressed in, heavy with heartbreak. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned abruptly to see Clara standing in the doorway, expression wrought with conflicted sympathy. The maid entered slowly, speaking in hushed, measured tones, as though she feared eavesdroppers lurking behind every door. Clara revealed that Alan had called a private meeting, likely attended by the household's key staff, to outline the final steps to save Julia. Clara had overheard only fragments, mention of a forced medication and a procedure to be done quickly. Janice's heartbeat thundered. No longer were the rumors vague. The threat to her unborn child was immediate, possibly within hours. A piercing terror rippled through her. She clutched Clara's hand.
Is there no one who can help me escape?
Her voice resonated with desperation, echoing through the quiet nursery. Clara's eyes brimmed with pity, but she confessed fear of losing her job or incurring Alan's wrath. She hesitated, then, as if summoning a gust of valor, she whispered that if Janice truly sought to flee, she might do it during the nightly guard's rotation when the manor's vigilance slackened. She also warned that any attempt to contact the outside world had to be discreet, for Alan had already threatened dire consequences if the family's affairs became public. Though terror and exhaustion weighed on her, Janice felt a spark of resolve flare in her chest. She refused to let her baby be sacrificed on the altar of Alan's devotion to Julia. She had to seize her chance. Hours crawled by as she wandered the manor with purposeful aimlessness, gathering bits of knowledge. She verified which doors were locked, which gates might be left unguarded, how many staff patrolled at night. Over the years, she had become intimately familiar with the labyrinthine architecture, secret passages that once delighted her sense of discovery, hidden compartments behind bookcases, a concealed route to the orchard beyond the stone wall. She prayed these features still offered her an advantage. That evening, a hush enveloped the estate once again. The damp gloom of dusk settled in, and the staff lit lamps in the corridors, their flames flickering like uncertain hopes. Janice made a show of returning to her bedroom, feigning fatigue. She closed the door behind her, heart pounding, and patiently waited until she heard the scuffle of footsteps fade into the distance. Out the window, the sky turned an inky blue, dotted with faint stars partially obscured by tattered clouds. She rubbed her abdomen gently, as though reassuring both herself and her child. Around midnight, the manor exhaled a profound silence. Janice knew the staff's nightly rotation had begun. Summoning every shred of courage, she slipped out of her room. The corridor was lit only by low-burning sconces, casting distorted shadows on the walls. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she padded down the wide hallway, hugging the walls to avoid detection. She planned to circumvent the main staircase, too open, too easily spotted, and instead took a lesser-known route through a library antechamber. She remembered an old service corridor behind a row of shelves. She turned the handle on a discreet door, thankfully it opened without a squeak, and stepped into a narrow passage, dusty with disuse. Every breath tasted of stale air and cobwebs. She inched forward, chest tightening, the child inside her kicking as though sensing her tension. Eventually, a faint glimmer of moonlight gleamed through a cracked wooden hatch at the far end of the corridor. She pushed it open cautiously. A swirl of crisp night air and the subtle scent of wet grass greeted her. Peering outside, she realized the exit led into a remote corner of the garden near the orchard's edge, an area seldom patrolled. Relief fluttered in her chest. Softly, she lowered herself out, feeling the cool dew cling to her slippers. The orchard loomed beyond, a series of twisted fruit trees grown wild after months of neglect. The rustle of leaves in the mild wind felt like the orchard was whispering encouragement for her flight. She cast one last glance at Briggs Manor, silhouetted against the star-flecked sky. It looked both somber and imposing, an embodiment of Alan's tyranny. She murmured a silent farewell to the life she once imagined there, a life now irretrievably lost. But fate would not allow an easy escape. A flicker of movement at the corner of her vision jolted her heart. A figure carrying a lantern glided across the lawn. She crouched behind a low hedge, breath quivering as the yellow glow passed dangerously close. Fear pounded in her veins. Through the hedge's dark leaves, she recognized the face of Jade, the young maid often sent on errands for Alan. Jade's expression held a mixture of anxiety and duty. Something about it suggested she might be searching for Janice or ensuring that no one attempted to leave. Janice remained utterly still, each breath shallow, her hand pressed firmly over her belly to quell her baby's restless kicks. After what felt like an eternity, Jade moved on, the lantern's light drifting away. Only then did Janice dare to resume her path into the orchard. She advanced step by step, careful to avoid the occasional twig or stone that might snap underfoot and reveal her location. The orchard's canopy overhead formed a dark labyrinth of branches, but at least it shielded her from watchers in the mansion's upper windows. At length, she reached a dilapidated stone wall that bordered the estate. Moss clung to its uneven surface, and sections were crumbling. She recalled that on her honeymoon, Alan had guided her along the perimeter, boasting that this wall had withstood centuries. The irony that it might be her salvation now twisted in her mind. She found a portion of collapsed mortar, forming a low gap. Pain flared in her abdomen as she knelt to carefully crawl through, but she gritted her teeth, pressing on despite the strain. If she did not push through now, the child might never be safe. Finally, with one last effort, she slipped beyond the wall and emerged onto a narrow lane that snaked away from Briggs Manor, half illuminated by the moon. Overgrown hedges lined its edges, rustling softly. Beyond lay the unknown, dark fields, possibly a forest, and a vague sense that a small village was many miles down the road. She paused to catch her breath, tears of relief and apprehension spilling down her cheeks. The wind brushed against her damp hair, as though encouraging her to step forward. No matter how uncertain her prospects, she had chosen to protect the life within her at all costs. She was free, at least for the moment, from Alan's twisted domain. Distantly, from behind the manor walls, she thought she heard faint shouts, perhaps the staff discovering her absence. The urgency of flight surged anew. She turned toward the lane, forcing her weary legs to carry her onward. Each footstep was a promise to her child, an assertion that motherly devotion would outlast even the strangling grip of betrayal. She walked for what felt like an hour, the lane never quite revealing its end. Occasionally, a field mouse scurried across the path, or a cluster of small birds took flight from a nearby hedgerow. The hush of the countryside felt profound after the stifling hush of the manor. Though the night air nipped at her skin and the ground turned muddier beneath her shoes, she welcomed each sign of honest nature, far removed from the suffocating tensions she left behind. Eventually, her body demanded rest. She found a small clearing beneath an ancient oak, its gnarled branches forming a partial shelter overhead. Carefully, she eased herself onto a patch of grass, her back leaning against the trunk. Exhaustion weighed on her eyelids, but her mind refused to quiet. She wondered if Alan would dispatch men to search the neighboring villages, or if he would personally ride out into the night. The idea of being hunted made her stomach twist with fear, yet she clung to a single unwavering thought. She had escaped for now. She had made a choice to safeguard her baby's future, no matter the cost. Time shifted unsteadily in that moonlit clearing. Her thoughts wove together, flashbacks of the manor's corridors, flickers of conversation with Clara, and pangs of sorrow for the romance she once shared with Alan. She recognized that he had succumbed to an obsession, loving Julia in a manner so absolute that it brooked no empathy for others. She loathed him for it, yet also pitied the man she had once believed him to be. A biting gust of wind snapped her from her reverie. She realized she could not linger in the open for long. Morning would eventually reveal her location, and if Alan's reach extended further than she hoped, she might be at risk even here. Summoning her last store of stamina, she rose to continue along the road. The baby kicked again, prompting her to murmur quiet reassurances. Then she moved on. As she walked, the darkness gradually thinned, giving way to the earliest hints of dawn. Over the fields, the sky shifted from black to muted gray, and a single star persisted, shimmering faintly like a distant beacon. Part of her wished it were some benevolent spirit guiding her, but she knew she must rely on her own resolve. At length, a cluster of shapes materialized on the horizon, likely the outlines of a small hamlet or roadside inn. Hope fluttered in her chest. Perhaps she could beg shelter from strangers, or find a carriage to take her to a far-off town. Meanwhile, the memory of Alan's chilling statement returned.
Sacrifices must be made.
She interpreted it now as a vow that he would not stop until Julia's condition improved, no matter how many lives were shattered along the way. Janice pressed on, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, yet a fierce determination burning within. She pictured the future with her child, maybe a modest cottage somewhere, away from everything that Briggs Manor represented, away from Alan's manipulations. She would teach the baby to laugh freely under an untroubled sky, never haunted by the cold corridors she herself had endured. As she drew nearer to the faint lights that announced the presence of people, a faint song of birds rose with the breaking dawn. The sound felt like a testament to survival, to the notion that even in the darkest night, life persisted. In her heart, she harbored a fragile but steadfast conviction. She was forging a new destiny for herself and her child, one that might be unburdened by the cruelty that had overshadowed her days. Yet behind her, in the labyrinthine chambers of Briggs Manor, the forces of obsession and betrayal simmered. She knew Alan might soon discover her path and send pursuit. She felt Julia's name still carried weight in the legacy of that household, fueling decisions made in secrecy. But for the first time in many months, Janice found herself inhaling air free of fear's stale stench. With each step, she charted a future built not on illusions or manipulations, but on the powerful love she had for the life blossoming inside her. And so, her journey continued. The sun rose inch by inch, gilding the lonely road with early morning rays. The wind abated, leaving a cool hush. It was in that hush that Janice found her most profound assurance. Though battered by heartbreak, threatened by a husband's merciless schemes, she stood resolute, guided by a mother's unshakable devotion. She vowed that if Alan reached for her child again, he would find not a submissive prisoner, but a mother ready to defend her child's future with every fragment of her being. Far away, the silhouette of Briggs Manor might still loom under ominous clouds, haunted by the echoes of Janice's pleas. But out here, along this open stretch of dawn-lit lane, the seeds of a new chapter stirred. For the first time in a long while, Janice allowed herself to dream of life beyond captivity, a life in which love, far from being a weapon, could be a source of true freedom and promise. If you enjoyed this story, check out another video with an even more amazing tale. There's always something exciting waiting for you on our channel. And don't forget, more wonderful stories are coming soon. Hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our upcoming adventures.